table with Susan and Lucy. We are both co-chairs of the American Italian Food Coalition, and we're pleased you could join us today. Also joining us at the table is someone who can boast an amazing amount of titles, including being a dear friend of Lucy Coluti's. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lucy so she can introduce our special guest.
Well, thank you very much, Susan, and it's great to have Jim here. Let me say that the coalition is made up of 450 or more Italian companies that export great food at affordable prices to American consumers. Things like pasta and coffee and biscuits and wafers. And what better way to sort of talk about this wonderful relationship between Italy and the United States that goes back a long time and is very, very special than to have someone like Jim Rosapepe, state senator, ambassador, join us today. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks a lot. It's great to be with you.
Good. Well, first of all, we've got a lot of wonderful questions for you in this conversation, but I think, really surprised, and so was Susan, to discover that you were born in Rome, Italy. Tell us about that.
Well, I don't remember much because I was very young when I was born. And people say, why were you born in Rome? I said, because that's where my mother was when I was born. It's kind of important. I only lived there 8 months. I literally have no recollection of it. But my father was Italian. He was also born in Italy. He came to the United States when he was less than a year old. He grew up in the United States, although spent a lot of time in Italy, and spoke fluent Italian. Married my mother. They were raised in Youngstown, Ohio. My mother was from an Irish family, a normal mixed marriage that we're all familiar with. And they were both journalists. They met working for the Youngstown Vindicator and then moved to New York to work for the Associated Press. Make a long story short, after World War II, after my sister had been born, she was about 10 years older than I. They decided they wanted to live in Europe for a couple of years. And so he got a gig with the Journal of Commerce, which people don't remember now, but it was like the Wall Street Journal for the Port of New York, when the port was much bigger than Wall Street. And she got a gig with the Boston Globe, being their Rome reporter, and they both got a deal to write articles for the Saturday Evening Post. And so they lived in Rome for 2 years. My older sister learned Italian, and I was born, and then they came back when I was 8 months old. That's the story of being born in Rome. But I've been to Rome a lot and been to Italy a lot, but that's how I come to be born in Rome.
I'm sure you have. Do you remember where your father was born in Italy and where your ancestors come from in Italy?
Oh, very, very much. And I know them. It's an amazing story. So my father's family was from a small mountain town about 90 minutes from Napoli, Contursi Terme. And his father, the Rosapepe family was unlike a lot of immigrants in the United States. His father's family were like the rich people in town, a very small town, but they were like the rich people with the big house on the hill and the vineyards and all that stuff. And so olive groves. And so his grandfather was sent to medical school in Napoli in the early part of the 20th century, where he met my grandmother, who was from Russia, the only girl in her medical school class. And I literally have a picture of my grandmother with 8 other medical school students with a skeleton posing as medical school students. She graduated, so 1913, while she was finishing her last year in medical school, they got married. My father was born in 1913. She graduated from medical school in 1914. And it was a time, obviously, of tremendous Italian immigration in the United States. And the Italian government, like today, the Mexican government, like the Salvadorian government, which have lots of immigrants coming to the United States, they took a great interest in how the Italians were being treated in the United States. And one of the things that was obvious was the Anglo doctors were not that interested in taking care of the Italian immigrants. So the Italian government basically was encouraging young medical school graduates to move to the United States. And so that's how my grandparents came. So literally, she graduates from medical school. They get on the boat with my father, less than a year old. They go to Brooklyn. They stay in Brooklyn for, I guess, a year or 2 or 3. And then they move to Youngstown, Ohio, which is where they live the rest of their life. The other piece of the story back on the family, though, is I have a first cousin who is the daughter of my father's second cousin, the daughter of my father's cousin. Make a long story short, he was a great engineer who knew a lot about submarines. He was smuggled out of Italy in World War II to help the American military effort to win in World War II. Settled in Newport, Rhode Island. Anyway, got married, grew up. His daughter was a terrific musician. She studied music in the United States, got her BA, and then went back to Naples, to Napoli, to do graduate work.
Right.
And she's about my age. So this is like, decades ago. Of course, she goes back and visits the family in Cantorsi Terme, which is only like 90 minutes from Napoli. Lots of family still there. She falls in love with a local boy, gets married, stays in Cantorsi Terme, the town my grandfather and her grandfather came from. She and her husband have taken the Terme Rosapepe, which are the mineral springs that the families owned for like probably back into the 18th century, and developed them, built a luxury hotel. Anybody who wants to visit, Rosapepe Terme is the place to check it out. And so Sheila and I have visited periodically. We were there the year before COVID. We spent 3 or 4 days with Lucia and her family. So a lot of connections.
Thank goodness, talk about a legacy. That town and your family have quite a legacy. I love that. Susan, that's a beautiful story.
A great story. I don't think any of our guests are going to be able to compete with that.
Right. So, Jim, knowing all of this, do you think that you've had such a successful career? Where do I begin? Your success in government and politics and tax and economic policy in Maryland as a delegate to the legislature and then as a state senator. You run unopposed, you're so popular. President Clinton appointed you ambassador to Romania. You have written an incredible book about that experience. You came home and continued your wonderful career in Maryland. You're an entrepreneur. When I look at all of those things, I have to ask you, do you think your Italian heritage has instilled in you certain values, a certain legacy, shall we say, that has helped you be the man you are today?
Well, for sure. Different people have different experiences with their Italian experience. But one of the things that I always say about immigrants, not just Italian immigrants, but all immigrants, by definition, immigrants have get up and go because they got up and left. The folks who didn't have get up and go stayed. And so it's a real self-selection process for immigrants in the United States. And we see this with new immigrants today, but we saw it all in our own families. And so I think that's a significant piece of it. It's self-selection of which Italians came, the ones who were adventurous came. So that's one. The second thing I'd say is that all the reasons that both of you ladies know is Italian culture in Italy, in the United States, is a welcoming culture, is an open culture, is a loving culture. Not all cultures are like that. Have you ever been to France? So what I'm saying, so I think I'm not as lovable as my father was or my aunts and uncles were, but I do think in both business and politics, being open to other people, trying to see the best in other people, trying to learn from other people. I mean, all that I think is part of Italian culture. I mean, there's a reason why Italian culture and Latin culture broadly has been so influential all over the world. It's kind of obvious in a way. I mean, you think of Marco Polo. Let's just start there.
That's so true. And of course, along with the Italian experience and what makes us what we are today is food, right? Always food. One of the things that the coalition, Susan and I are proud to talk about, is we promote the Mediterranean diet, which is such a part of what Italy is and what America is when it experiences Italian food. So do you have a relationship with Italian food, memories of that being a part of the Rosapepe family?
Well, I do, but it's much more a current part of my life than a historical part of my life. I just give you an example. In Annapolis, where the state capital is, where I'm most of the time there during the first 3 months of the year, there are several great Italian restaurants. I mean, like spectacular Italian restaurants. And it's a joke among my colleagues when we say, let's go have dinner. I say, yeah, you're going to want to go to Luna Blue. You're going to want to go to Osteria. I said, of course I am. So it's very much a part of my life today, for sure. The other thing I was going to say, and actually going to ask you ladies this, is why can't I get Moretti Rosa today in Maryland? There's a shortage of Moretti Rosa. I'm just putting that on the table for you.
Supply chain.
Jim?
No, absolutely. No,
That's my
absolutely. No,
answer for everything these days.
no, I understand. But literally,
Well, Jim, we'll have to check on that.
exactly. So I'm engaged with Italian food and drink. There's no question about it.
I'm going to turn just for a moment to this incredible experience you had as our ambassador to Romania. That was Bill Clinton appointing you. How did that come about? And of course, you wrote this book. What's the book called?
The book's called Dracula is Dead: How Romania Survived Communism and Became the New Italy.
And you were there at such an important transitional time. Isn't that great? That's the title of that book. Tell us about that.
Well, I was there about 7 years after the fall of communism, but literally during the buildup and then the war in Kosovo, in former Yugoslavia. So a lot was going on. I do want to relate it back to Italy, though, because when I was there, the largest number of foreign investors in Romania were from Italy, very engaged. Today, the largest number of Romanians living outside of Romania or Moldova, which is next door, which historically is Romanian, are in Italy. And the reason is pretty simple. At one level is the language. Romanian is one of the 5 Romance languages. As I like to think, they call it Romania for a reason. And so there's a strong connection. The other thing, culturally, it's in Central and Eastern Europe, and we in the United States tend to think of Central and Eastern Europe as being Slavic, Russian, Ukraine, Czech, Polish. Well, they're not. They are Latin. They consider themselves Latin. Their history is Latin. The 2 national symbols are 2 military leaders. Trajan, who was the Roman general who conquered the area that's Romania, and there's Trajan's column in Rome. And Decebal was the local leader who got defeated by the Romans. Romania is the only country in the world that I know of, there may be more, where their 2 national heroes are the general who won and the general who lost.
But that's so Italian.
Exactly.
Doesn't matter.
And it comes down, it's not just history. So people name their kids this way. So the guy who was finance minister when I was there, his name was Trajan Decebal Rebish. His parents had named him after both of these guys. Anyway, so they are very Latin. They consider themselves very Latin. They call themselves a Latin island in a sea of Slavs. And so so culturally, they're much more like Italians than they are like other Slavs, to the point that within about 3 months of living there, as I was meeting all these people, I say, these guys remind me of my uncles. So it's really a very interesting place from a cultural point of view in relation to Italy.
That's a wonderful way to describe what it was like for you. You know, and I know that part of the reason that you would have been drawn to that position is your strong economic background, your knowledge of economics, tax policy, trade, also certainly as a distinguished member of the House of Delegates and the State Senate. I want to turn it over to Susan to kind of have the conversation revolve around that specialty of yours.
Hey, thank you so much, Lucy and Jim. I have to tell you, I have learned so much in these short few minutes with you, including the fact that your grandmother obviously was quite the boss lady. So you come from a family of strong women, so good for you.
Absolutely.
So
He's
Yeah.
married to a strong woman too.
Like to hear that. Like to hear that. So going as a follow-on to Lucy's lead up to this question, we talk in our coalition a lot about trade, and it would be great as asking you, Ambassador, why it is that trade is so important, particularly to the transatlantic partnership. If you could just delve a little bit deeper in terms of what you've seen when you've gone back and forth to Italy and your experiences in Romania, and obviously as a leader in government.
Well, obviously, different people are good at different things, and different people have different kinds of soil. And obviously, Italy is known for so many things that, and obviously in the United States, food is one of the biggest. I mean, there are not a lot of people in the United States who talk about, I gotta get some of that British food. All the time. Yeah, I never have trouble taking anybody to an Italian restaurant. So I mean, the connection is obviously historical and very current. I do think, from a policy point of view, it's been challenging, and I'm not all up on the details of it, but the whole issue of the free trade agreement between the EU and the United States has been very difficult and very challenging. And I don't know, you ladies know better than I do the implications of that for the food industry in Italy. But Brexit obviously created a lot of complications with the EU-US relationship. But I guess the message would be the United States and Western Europe need to get off Russian gas and get on Italian food. I think that would be the message, basically.
I don't know how I follow up with the question. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, Lucy and I talk a lot about the fact that, we come from the same culture, which, as you said, is so well defined, and then making sure. And the thing that brings Italians and everybody else in the world together is Italian food, right? To your point. And so, what we try and talk about is that, trade is when we can get so much of what are Italian goods over to the United States at a reasonable cost. We continue to strengthen that relationship through culture, through governments, take the whole gamut of, it sounds silly, but food without tariffs, a food, that allows for free trade and, all the things that you love, kind of solidifies the relationships between
Absolutely.
Our two countries.
No, I agree with that, although I'll push back a little bit in the sense that people greatly underestimate how strong the relationship is between Italy and the United States from a security and defense point of view.
Yes, that's true.
I mean, everybody always talks about the French are hard to get along with and the Germans are big shots or whatever, and people just don't talk about Italy. The reality is, and I saw this in Romania, and I've seen this Italy, along with the UK, is the United States' strongest ally in Europe. And Italy has advantages because it's not Anglo-Saxon, because it's continental, that as a US ally, and that's the reason we have these military bases there. I mean, literally when I was, this is a little going off topic, but a little bit when I was ambassador and the war in Kosovo was heating up, and the admiral in charge of the fleet, the NATO U.S. fleet based in Italy, came to visit Romania. His name was Joe Lopez.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Oh, very nice to meet you. This is great." He said, I'm 100% Italian. I'm from Calabria. My family's from Calabria. I said, "Funny you should mention that. I have a Spanish sounding name." And we just compared notes, and it was the case that both of our families came from when the Spanish occupied southern Italy. And so there are all these Spanish sounding names. But coming back to the defense part of it, is during the war in Kosovo, one of the things I had to do was to encourage the Romanian government to let the NATO bombers flying out of Aviano be able to go around Serbia and come in, flying in from the east instead of the west, because the Serbs had their anti-aircraft aimed west. And so every piece of this was related to Italy. I mean, I couldn't get away from it because they're such good allies and so involved. So that's not to say that trade doesn't strengthen it. It does, right. But it's on a very, very strong cultural um, understanding and partnership, but also a very, very strong defense and security partnership.
Yes, absolutely. And so I was in Congress around that time. Our position as the United States was that we're going to have an arms embargo because that will shut down the war. And I actually did go over to Kosovo and some other Croatia and other places, and there were Russian bombs all over the place. So yeah, there was an arms. This is very reminiscent of something we're continuing to live through. That everybody else played by the rules, and the Russians were continuing to send in arms to Slobodan Milosevic so that he could continue his genocide. So yeah,
absolutely. The other Italian connection to Romania when I was ambassador was there were a bunch of them. Oh, I have to tell this story. I apologize. So Romania was not in NATO. When I was ambassador, they got into NATO under George W. Bush. But there was a monthly meeting of NATO ambassadors that went around the table and talked about all the issues that we were concerned about in Romania. And there was a new Italian ambassador, a woman, who this was like her first meeting or second meeting. And so there was some dispute going on in the Romanian government. It seemed chaotic to the Norwegians. And I think the Norwegian ambassador was the chair of the meeting, and so he opened it up by saying, "Oh my gosh, it's so messed up. Everybody's fighting with each other. The parliament, the government, blah 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 blah." So we go around where everybody says something, and the pattern was actually that the Northern European and Canadian ambassadors were like, "Oh my God, it's so screwed up," and then it got to me and to the new Italian ambassador, and. This is what I was thinking, but she said it so eloquently. She said, "Well, I'm only been here a while, but the Romanians remind me a lot of my own people. They're stronger on spontaneity than on organization." And as the Italian ambassador to Romania, I find myself caught between two spontaneities. She was a terrific ambassador because she got it immediately. And she said what I was thinking. And then I said, "It's all going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. It's drama. It's going to be fine." And of course, it turned out to be fine. Anyway.
That's hysterical. That's like in my family. Well, not in my family. It was my husband and I, when he's like, "Why do you have to raise your voice?" I'm not raising my voice.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Right. This is how I'm talking right now. So I love it. That's a great part where the best and more spontaneous.
You want to get back to food and trade. What else? Do you like to
No. I think you've done just an excellent job of giving us the texture and the flavor.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm going to tell my own very quick story then about the Italians, in that my husband and I were in Kosovo during the time of the war against the Serbians. And there were 4 sections, you might recall. I know you'd recall, both of you.
Yeah.
And it was the British, the Germans, the Americans, and the Italians.
Right.
Those were the 4, right? And so the commanding officer of all of the troops, an American, said, "It's such an interesting difference among these cultures." He said, "The Germans are out in the forest picking up sticks. Everything has to be organized and disciplined. The British, we stop for tea time in the afternoon. We understand that, right? The Americans were constantly building. We were building buildings in the war zone. The Italians," and he stopped and he said, "they're so good looking. They dress so well, and they're all having such a good time."
Right.
Which group would I rather be with, right?
Exactly. Hey, Jim, before we let you go, we were talking about food. Do you have a favorite Italian meal?
Favorite Italian meal, yes, is linguine with white clam sauce.
Yeah, that's pretty spectacular. Yes.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's just been such a joy having you here today. I have enjoyed our long friendship.
As have I.
I'm glad that you and Susan know each other as well. And you've been a great guest in this conversation. So good luck with everything you do. And manja.
Hey, Jim, I want to be your long-term friend now.
That sounds good to me. No, really, thank you for what you're doing. And if there's anything I can do to help, if you could get on the Moretti Rosa thing, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Quid pro quo. We hear you.
Thank you. Thanks an awful lot.
Thank you
Ciao.
so much.
Bye-bye.